We're launching a series on drowning prevention. This is a really important subject to us. And in this first episode, we've convened a panel of experts and community stakeholders to talk about why we need to pay attention to this. We're really fortunate in Canada and the US to have such a robust lesson system that now in a COVID world where those services have been restricted or closed or canceled altogether, we may not be fully aware of the risks. So let's dive in and dissect this and get some great information. Let's get into it. Okay, again, thank you everybody for being here. So I'm just going to go through some quick introductions. We have Barb from the Lifesaving Society. We have Eric from Shendy Swim School in Toronto. We have Lisa from the Canadian Drowning Prevention Coalition. We have Adam from Canada Swim School and the Montreal Institute of Swimming. We have Tamar Connell as a representative from the YMCAs in Greater Toronto. And joining us from south of the border, we have Melissa Sutton from Active Kids Global. Thank you all for being here. So I want to start just with some individual answers to a simple question. Has COVID or because of the robust nature of the system of swimming and teaching in Canada, in the US, and we do such a good job of making sure that every kid knows how to swim. In a COVID world where we've had basically a year and a half of no or little swimming, are we at risk of not really understanding the true risk of drowning because we've done such a good job of preventing it in the past? I'm going to go to Adam and let him start.
Yep. So first, thanks for putting this all together, Jason. And yes, I'm located in Quebec, but we have definitely seen an impact from COVID on, what's happening with drownings. In Quebec alone, drownings were up over 51% last year in 2020 or summer of 2020. A lot of these drownings, every drowning is preventable, but the vast majority or a good chunk of them were a direct result of what's happening with COVID in terms of less pool or less supervised areas being available to swim, more people seeking out alternate ways to refresh themselves on hot days since a lot of pools were closed or had limited capacities. So a lot of people seeking waterways, rivers, lakes, stuff like that. And there were a lot of drownings there too. Backyard drownings were up as well. It's important to mention that the fact that kids have had limited access, if any access, to swimming lesson over the past year and a bit is definitely a contributing factor to this. So to answer your question, Jason, yes, the ongoing COVID situation has definitely had a negative impact on the number of drownings we've seen here.
Okay, I want to go to Tamar next. Tamar, can you share perspective from your perspective and that maybe of the YMCA as well?
Yeah, so at the Y, we offer swimming lessons for not only children, but their adult parents as well. We see a lot of newcomer families at our centers. So of course, our pools have been closed since the pandemic hit. So of course, these families, as Adam said, have been seeking out other places to go swimming. So we've heard about, of course, these drownings that have happened. So we've worked to keep in touch with our families and educate them on safer swimming habits. So utilizing our staff that are on queues, etc., to just talk to them and say, swim where there's a lifeguard, using PFDs and life jackets, things like this. To just try and make sure that they're staying safe as possible. But we know they are going to try and find alternate sources. So it definitely is going to happen, but we want to try and keep them as safe as possible.
Yeah, thank you. Barb, I wanted to know, I guess, from the perspective of a service provider, maybe you can dive into a little bit more of the meat of it because you sit on a lot of stats. You have a lot of information.
Yeah, so I think it's important to note, Jason, that of course our statistics are always a couple of years behind, but we do have the trend data. So if we look at the initial shutdown from COVID in the spring of 2020, we have observational and media reported data. So that observational data told us that there was a lot of outdoor activity, and we did have drownings. Now, that wasn't necessarily all children, because again, the trend data is more to your adults. Because our indoor and outdoor public aquatic facilities are lifeguarded, we've always had a low drowning rate there. And so some of the pools were open, some were closed, some were open. Then we got into a lot of one-on-one swimming lessons, private lessons. Now we're closed again. The one good thing is the government has allowed us to continue on with leadership and life-saving and lifeguard training and staff training. So I think we were able to run a really strong Water Smart campaign last year in the summer of 2020, even with COVID and the facilities not open in the communities to be our messengers. And so we took a different route and a very strong social media approach, and it actually had a lot of really positive impact and went very well. So I think the important thing for us to stay on top of and watch for the summer of 2021 is that COVID has increased our outdoor activity significantly. There are less group programming and, of course, less supervised public facility visits, and everybody's out in the outdoors. And so, then we have to look at the barriers of protection in regard to how we go there. So we had a really strong Water Smart campaign with the town of Banff last year, and that's continuing, where the community took up the charge and the champion to the messaging outdoors with signage and that sort of thing. So I think what we have to do is not accept this as a new normal, but we have to look at alternative strategies, the outdoor activities and those areas. And we have to look at, working towards maintaining that industry standard, not lowering it, but also trying to continue to make sure that there's training going on, especially the life-saving and the leadership, because when we do open up again, and we're going to need that base for our facilities so that we can have supervision and continue the low drowning rate in those supervised areas.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm going to turn to Eric next, and I want to kind of just drill down a little bit more into the idea of whether or not, as Canadians and Americans, we take the low drowning rate in pools for granted because stakeholders such as yourself have done such a good job of making sure that kids know how to swim and people are water safe. Do we take that for granted?
I don't think we take it for granted. I think that the drownings, will be interesting to watch this coming year, especially with the kids and the adults, new Canadians not having swam in so long. We were fortunate at the swim school to be able to run lessons from last summer to about November 24th, to be exact. So I think that because they've had such a long break, even the lifeguards are out of touch with what to do. So we can't guarantee that this 1% drowning rate around supervised settings is going to stay at 1%. Our goal was to get supervised settings to 0. And Lisa will talk about the Drowning Prevention Coalition. That was that was a main goal. And I happened to sit on that committee within the coalition. But I always look back at the global report on drowning that came out a number of years ago, and they always said, swimming lessons is really either the number 2 or number 3 way to offset the drowning rate. The first is to barrier water, to put up fencing. And the fact that they cut off lessons, really concerned me throughout the year. I did sit on a number of committees, and I went before media saying that we've got to make swimming lessons an essential service. But the essential word became this gray area, across the country. So it wasn't a project we were willing to push through. But back to your question, Jason, it's a concern. The fact that it's 1% right now, I think that number is going to go higher. We were also fortunate, like Barbara, to be able to operate lifeguard and life-saving training through the pandemic safely with protocols. But the number of lifeguards that are going to be required to supervise these areas that potentially may open up this summer is concerning to me because people are out of touch and out of practice.
I want to go next to south of the border and Melissa and get your take on the same question. So it's a little bit different, and I'm going to let the institutional experts speak on this in a moment, but tell us a little bit about the US and Canada. The majority of drownings happen around open water. Do you get the sense that people have taken water safety for granted in the US?
I echo a lot of the sentiments that have already been expressed. But what we are seeing here, and first I want to also let you know that I'm with the National Drowning Prevention Alliance. So I've got the more national scope for us here as well. But I also am on the board member for our Drowning Prevention Coalition of Arizona. So I can break it down to a little bit localized, and that kind of is relevant to what you guys do, whether it's your territories or Canada as a whole. Certainly, we saw exactly what you were seeing, and we fought the battles you fought. And similarly, we had to get creative with regard to our messaging and how we put it out there. It was definitely social media and webcasts and relying on our communities to get the information out that we couldn't do. We typically were seeing a trend downward because of all the layers that we put in place. Speaking to a little bit of what has been mentioned before, Arizona first saw its big decrease in drownings because of the barrier laws that were put in place. And now our barrier laws are still very weak nationally. So then we rely on the swim lessons that are provided, which, as we know, that didn't happen as much in force as last year. So, from the locals' perspective, Arizona's numbers definitely went up. We had a horrible, we were the lowest we've ever seen before in 2019 and 2020. We were starting to shoot back up, and we attribute a lot of that to lack of swim lessons, lack of supervision. We talk about the layers of protection, but in Texas, because most of their drownings happen in community pools, their numbers went down. So it's just kind of what data you're looking at, how those drownings are taking place and where. But we also launched at the national level the resource center, and we pushed that out as many channels as we could to say, here's some resources, here's some information. And we honed in on backyard pop-up pools, because that was something we were starting to see, as you guys are noticing. Not only were they going out to rivers and lakes where we typically do see the majority of drownings nationwide and with our adults, but now we're starting to see these pop-up pools. So we had to get information out about that. So it was kind of just coming at us at all angles of, oh my goodness, what layers are being breached and how do we message against them, because we can't have people in a pool being taught lessons. And then, as you guys know, we share Great Lakes, and that is a huge problem for us. I mean, I think there's recorded over 900 drownings that we know of on the Great Lakes. I think just from our state reporting, I don't even know if that includes Canada's numbers. So I think I answered a lot of questions in that one.
No, it was absolutely great. And I'm going to turn to Lisa next and get Lisa to weigh in on that, and then bridge over to talk a little bit about the Canadian Drowning Prevention Plan, and then we'll bring Melissa back in a minute. But so to you, Lisa, the same question on basically, have we taken water safety for granted? Do we expect to see an increased risk? And then tell us about the work behind the Canadian Drowning Prevention Plan.
Thanks, Jason, and thanks for setting this up. This is such an important conversation to have. We've done a really great job setting up leadership programs, life-saving, lifeguarding programs across Canada. And we see that echoed in terms of fewer than 1% of drownings taking place in lifeguarded supervised settings. And I'm really being specific in terms of identifying supervised settings as being lifeguarded when we're looking at that number. The Drowning Prevention Coalition's technical working group focusing on supervised settings redefined that. They dug a little bit deeper, and Eric is privy to that because he sits on that technical working group. And so other supervised settings may include, boating activities, school activities, other places in, on, or around water in which supervision is assumed. And so when we ran those numbers through the database, and I'll talk about the fatal drowning database in a moment, we found that number increased, that percentage increased to 3%. It's still 1 in 3%. They're very small numbers. So what's happening here? And let me I'm going to swing over to another piece of your question, and then I'm going to talk about the fatal drowning database here in Canada, because it's quite impressive, and we're really fortunate to have that. The Canadian Drowning Prevention Coalition came about as a result or in response to the World Health Organization's report on drowning back in 2014. And they put out a subsequent publication, Preventing Drowning, an implementation guide in 2017. So the coalition came about and formed in and around 2016. One of its key pieces of communications is the Canadian Drowning Prevention Plan. So what was it going to look like? It wasn't about implementation, but rather about taking the data, combining it with the experts so that these experts could then create recommendations for implementation. And then we have delivery partners such as Lifesaving Society, Red Cross, and other stakeholders at various levels and within various sectors implementing these to make things happen, because we know that no matter what it is that we say at a national level, and Melissa may get this too, we can say what we want to say, but the true magic happens at the community level. It's those communities that take that information and make it their own. So at a national level, we identified 13 possible target areas. That's far too many. We were trying to narrow that down to 5. We came back with 8, and that includes supervised settings being 1, because even though that percentage that we talked about earlier is really, really low, we figured it would be the first and easiest to achieve 0. And it's, the pandemic has thrown a big monkey wrench in all of that, but we can still strive to achieve 0. So taking a look at stats just for a moment for 2020, because we talked on that earlier, and I have some from the Drowning Prevention Research Centre Canada. And again, that fatal drowning database that actually came about in and around 1990. So there were some questions taking place about who was drowning. And so that information started to be collected. We have wonderful partnerships with the chief coroners and medical examiners across Canada. So we gather this data. And so this database has been building for about 30 years, envy of the world. We have this data, it continues to grow. We also collect preliminary data as part of this. And I say we because there was a recent amalgamation with the Drowning Prevention Research Centre and the Canadian Drowning Prevention Coalition. So now we actually have under one single umbrella, the data and the experts working together. And of course, this is now falling under a broader banner within Lifesaving Society Canada as well, and Lifesaving Society Ontario, because the DPRC is linked into LSO. And so you now have a delivery partner. So look at the different levels here, right? You give the layers of the drowning data, combined with the experts, combined with one delivery partner, one delivery stakeholder of many that can make this happen. So we're just now starting to figure out how this partnership is going to get tighter, but it truly is a dream to work with. So I pulled up some data for you, and this includes some preliminary data as well, because as Barb mentioned earlier, we're 2 years behind in this, and that makes complete sense. We're working with the coroners and chief medical examiners, and so many of these cases still have yet to be closed. So we're always going to be looking about 2 years behind. But we nonetheless track information within the media, and we track that information and we combine it and link it up when we do get the actual data later. So preliminary data from 2020 indicates that there were in fact more fatal drownings in Canada as compared to the previous year, so as compared to 2019. However, there were still more drownings in 2018, fatal drownings, than there were in 2020. So that's an interesting thing to note. Coming back to Adam's statement about Quebec, because Quebec has been a real outlier here, especially when we look at fatal drownings in 2020. And so we see that there was actually a 64% increase in Quebec, which is significantly higher than both 2019 and 2018. And so we need to take a bigger dive into this, pun intended, to really look at the locations and the who, what, when, where, and how, right? So this is, we have those bits and pieces as we present them in the National Drowning Report each year, but we really will, this is going to be interesting to see what's happened there, because it's really not, it wasn't a link to backyard pool fatalities per se. They weren't higher in 2020, even though there was a boom in backyard pool and was pop-up pool purchases, as Melissa referred to earlier. That wasn't the link. So again, research will come in and take a look at this retrospectively, because that's all we can really do.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that we'll definitely look to check in with you on that as we progress and so on and so forth. I want to turn to, before I move on more with the stats and whatnot, I want to turn back to Tamar, Eric, and Adam, just from a community perspective, given the information that Lisa just shared. How are you imparting that message? How are you bringing that message to your community? So I'm going to go to Adam first here.
So look, we've tried to take a very proactive stance in terms of educating the community in terms of drowning prevention. Being said, the most important thing, in my opinion, one of the things that we can actually do and what we're trying to do as a club is, and this is a little outside the box thinking, so bear with me, everybody. But, I feel that what we can be doing is to sort of, how do I say this? But I guess change the expectation of when kids need to know how to swim. And I apologize again if I'm going a little bit off topic, but one thing I really wanted to get out there is that there is an expectation out there that kids can only learn how to swim around 6, 7 years old. That's the age that they become independent swimmers. And, we've been trying really hard to sort of promote a lower age and make parents know that you have to get kids into swimming at a younger age because they can learn to swim on their own at a younger age. And, this in conjunction with the fact that we're trying to revamp our lesson programming. The Red Cross does an excellent job of this. But from the very beginning, Red Cross is promoting water safety from the very early levels. And this is something we feel needs to be expanded across every swim program across the province, across the country. And by educating families and swimmers at younger ages in terms of how to be safe, and then in terms of what are the expectations for swimming, when should you be able to swim on your own, and how can you do that safely, it's a really good way, we feel, to start, to help promote water safety and reduce drownings even further.
A great answer. And there's nothing out of the box with that answer. So thank you for being proactive with that. Eric, I want to go to you next.
Well, we have continued to connect with our community of families that come to the swim school through social media, sending them newsletters on tips and tricks on how to be safe around water, just to make sure that's maintained throughout the year. I think it's going to become a situation where it's going to be the haves and the have-nots going forward in the spring here in Ontario. The haves will be those that have backyard pools that can welcome an instructor back there, which is a complete luxury. We did a bunch of programs like that last summer when families asked us to come to them. And so we catered to them. And again, it's all about teaching kids and adults to swim that don't know how. So anybody we can get our hands on or off of to teach them how to swim, we're going to do it. The summer camp industry, of which I'm very well connected and part of the task force to open camps in Ontario. And we talk to Canadian Camping Association as well on a regular basis. It's like a 50-50 right now. Don't quote me on that. But, as long as cases in different provinces continue to go down, the camps might be another place to promote lessons and aquatics and so forth. But again, with the shutdowns, all we can do is connect through social media, newsletters, emails, answer questions. When I was on media about a month ago, the reporter asked me, what kind of tips can we give parents who have backyard pools to teach their own children? And to me, that was a really interesting and scary question at the same time, because unfortunately, we've seen statistics of parents who don't know how to swim before their children. And so I'm a little worried about that. So as far as access, that would be my big concern, and the haves and the have-nots. But we continue to connect with our families through the internet.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. So moving over to Tamar. So Tamar, with the YMCA in Toronto, you have, you're in one of the most densely populated areas of Toronto. The YMCA typically caters to a very wide or very diverse socioeconomic group of people. So you have people that are very well-to-do, you have first-time people into the country, and so on and so forth. So you also have a very broad range of swimmers and people looking for lessons. So maybe you can speak to how you address that diversity.
Yeah, so pre-pandemic, at all of our 9 centers, we were serving probably just over about 10,000 people through our different aquatic programs. So when we shut down, it was trying to find a way to continue educating those members. So the first thing we did is at our centers, we had a very successful junior lifeguard club program and a couple competitive programs, our Barracudas and our Wahoos at our West End and our Brampton location. So we started right away doing a virtual program with our junior lifeguard club and our competitive life-saving program. So immediately worked with the kids in the virtual program to build on like the safe swimming and all that. So they were working on projects, and even one project they did was just posting. They made posters and sent them to the coaches to post up on the windows. So members that would walk by the facilities were able to take a look at that. As I mentioned earlier, our lifeguards that were on cues were making phone calls to all of our swim lesson families, just to talk to them and let them know about staying safe around the water. We have continued with our junior lifeguard club program. One of our head coaches, Natasha, is doing a great job with that. So the kids will continue with doing like our water safety and reaching out to our members again for like within the next couple weeks. So we're just trying to make sure that the members know that we're here and we want to support them. And then on social media, reaching out and things like that too. So, and then for last summer, we were fortunate enough to be able to redeploy a bunch of our aquatic staff to our camps. So they were able to touch base with a lot of our families in that sense too. So we had our Toronto Island camp. We had another camp in Peel that was a kayak and canoe. So educating our families in that way when they were there about safe water behavior.
Great. That's fantastic. So I'm going to turn to Barb and then back over to Melissa. And I want to ask Barb to share a little bit about the National Drowning Report and more of the stats along the side there, and still come back to this idea, because what I'm looking to get from this panel is, one way or another, have my idea either validated or my thesis validated or debunked, that because of folks like you that are passionate about swimming, you bring this message, you drive it home every day to your clientele, to your members, and so on and so forth, that we have a critical mass of people that really have a good understanding of water safety. But if we take that away and enough time goes by without that education, we're going to be dipping into a black hole. We're going to be dipping into a point where there's going to become a gap, and then that's where the risk really occurs. So leading into the drowning report, so looking at the stats, and I'll just a quick overview and then please dive into it, Barb, but majority of swimming, of drowning related accidents don't happen in supervised settings.
Yeah. So, sorry, carry on.
No, I was handing it over to you.
Yeah. And so, I think one thing that's important to note, there's great work being done on the data. And, we've got technology on our side with that. But what's important to note is the evolution of the Canadian Drowning Report and the drowning reports across the country. And that evolution is that, each territory and province has their own drowning report because they have their own specific, unique data, even though there's general trend data. But the evolution has turned it into an infographic, a very simple, standardized infographic. And that's key to those wordy documents that we used to have. So we need those techies and those researchers and that sort of thing and those papers, but we really need to go back to what are the tools and what's the toolbox and the templates that are needed for community activation. And when I say community, I'm also meaning community of Canadian residents, whether it's as immigrants or, certain religious backgrounds. We have a lot of Mennonite and Hutterite colonies. So every community is unique. And so we need to reset ourselves. I don't believe in a new normal, but I believe we are going to have to reset and take the opportunity to move forward with a future vision in how we do this. And I believe we have to do it differently because we are, in a sense, going to be starting from scratch in a lot of areas. So we talk learn to swim, but what we really know and what we really mean based on the World Health Organization report is basic swim survival skills, right? And so we have to have standardized messaging, standardized infographics, icons. And if all of those that are passionate start working together better and sharing, then if I take my family to Arizona, the messaging is unique to the community, but the intent of the messaging needs to be standardized. And so we can talk about the data and the trend data. And of course, our youth in child drowning is low, but every time it happens, it's tragic and it tugs at our heartstrings. And we know that 99.9% is preventable. So we also need to refine and redefine our need to hang on to what an instructor is, right? And I heard Eric express some some concern with that. We need to understand that parents can teach, but we have to give them the tools and the box to do that in. They need, basic swim survival skills, but it needs to be in either supervised settings or have safe swim areas set up with life jackets in shallow water. So by us hoarding the teaching to just organize swim lessons, we need to shift that. So just like, bathtub drownings are up, there's lots of different things that are happening. I mean, who knows down the road what suicide by drowning might be. There's going to be different challenges that are thrown at us. So really, I think we have an opportunity to reset and collaborate and standardize and change the way we think, because community activation and access is going to be so important. And it's going to be the haves and have-not. We also depend on that education system. And years ago, right, when every child got swimming lessons, I still believe we need to work with our elected officials, and that's one of our pathways. But I don't think we should throw all our eggs into that basket and that be our only pathway that we pursue for children and adults being able to access basic swim survival skills. So let's not have a new normal. Let's reshift the old normal of how we think. And let's be better at it together and letting go of those myths that we grew up on and were trained and certified on, and look into the future to the millennial generation and the Canadian resident demographic in our unique communities. And we have to reach out to them and engage them and have them help us deliver these basic skills that we're going to have a huge void based on the results of COVID and the pandemic.
Yeah, I wanted to just, if you could just expand on something you referenced. You mentioned at one time all Canadians got swimming lessons. Can you expand on that a little bit? I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, so growing, it wasn't so much my boomer generation, but it was my children's generation, who are millennials, and pre-millennial, where you had swimming lessons in your educational curriculum in Alberta. And then that turned in, and that was lessons. So at least in elementary school, you got exposed to lessons. Well, then with the cost of busing and liability and everything, so then that turned into an aquatic activity in the curriculum. And then it disappeared, right? And so I don't believe we're going to have governments that support going back to what was there. So, okay, what do we work with governments so that they do support still trying to achieve the results of having every grade 3 student, or in elementary school at least, as early as possible, be exposed to learning basic swim survival skills, how to put a life jacket on, that sort of thing. I'm going to give you a good example. In the Northwest Territories in Yellowknife, they actually have a beautiful beach and lake, and it's within the municipal borders. And they had a drowning, and there was a fatality inquiry, and they worked with us. And the immediate charge was, we need to put a lifeguard on that beach. Well, the town couldn't sustain it. They could barely sustain putting lifeguards in their public pool. So we worked with them to wrap their head around putting a life jacket loaner station right on the beach and having beach attendants who did not have to have bronze medallion and bronze cross. What they had to have was, we gave them aquatic emergency care, a standard first aid, and they had a safe swim area supervised and roped off, and they became the water smart advocates. And the whole city of Yellowknife, and that beach on a hot day in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories can have 400 people on it, right? But we gave them all the tools and the standards of, okay, for every 400 square meters, we want at least one beach attendant, that sort of thing. But those locally employed young adults, students, did not have to take years and years and hundreds of dollars of training to be able to provide a safe environment, have life jackets free of charge, and provide basic swim survival skills through a Swim to Survive program on the beach. So that's in the Yellowknife Northwest Territories, people. If we can do it there, we can do it anywhere. They're doing it globally around the world, and we have to loosen those ties that we have to our traditional thinking, and now's the opportunity to do it.
Fair enough. Thank you for clarifying that and great answer. So I want to go to Lisa and Melissa next. I'm going to start with Lisa and just kind of build on, I guess, what for your purposes, Lisa, build on what Barb had talked about, but also ask a burning or try to answer a burning question that folks like Adam and Eric and people in businesses like that have. Why is swimming not an essential service? Why is Learn to Swim and drowning prevention and the services related, why are they not essential?
Remind me again of that question as we get toward the end. I've been writing down some notes. I echo everything that Barb has said here. So I'm going to try to touch on a few different pieces because these were all part of my speaking notes. So awesome, Barb. This is great. So the first thing I want to point out is, if you'll recall, I referred to the Canadian Drowning Prevention Plan of the key target groups. All right, and so that we were aiming for 5, ended up with 8, with supervised settings being one of those. But I think it's important because it echoes what everyone is saying here, that there are key groups that really are at high risk here. So we have children 1 to 4. We have new Canadians, especially those who have been in Canada for fewer than 5 years, notably those who have been here for fewer than 3 years. We have Indigenous peoples, so First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and of course, young adult males. They're just a mess. So Melissa's like nodding her head, right? Like we hear the drowning and we can almost write the story at this point. So that's going to be complicated to look at, but we continue to dive in. In terms of the areas or the circumstances, Northern Canada, rural areas, cold water, we've looped those into one group because there's a lot of echoing there. Water transport related drowning, be it commercial and recreational. We're really looking at recreational right now, but there's also ties in with commercial because we know that when a commercial boat goes down, there's more than one fatality. And of course, unintentional water entries. And so those are falls into water or people did not intend to go into the water at all. So what are we going to do? Reaching out to these groups, trying to educate the public in terms of what to look for, what to do, what to consider in terms of safety is all very important. I'm going to swing to survival swimming skills training because this is really important. And we talked earlier about what are we missing or what impact is the pandemic having. Not all provinces rolled out a Learn to Swim program through the years, but I'm a Gen Xer, and so I grew up in that system, and it continued on with the millennials after us, where we attended swimming lessons, grades 4, 5, and 6. And so we'd go in and learn those basic swim skills, really important. And as Barb mentioned, it started out as skills acquisition training, ended up being perceived to be recreational activity. A recreational activity is something that it's nice to have, but not necessary. And boom, it went off the budget because of all these other overhead costs. But it continues. in some provinces. So you look at the province of Ontario, you look at the province of Nova Scotia, you look at the province of Quebec, and so you've got survival swimming skills training. And we know that survival swimming skills training is essential. Global data has shown us that. Research has proven it time and time again. And if not survival swim skills training, so the basics in terms of how to reorient yourself from a fall into water, so be it through throwing yourself into the water or doing a roll into water, treading for a certain period of time, and then doing a distance swim so that you learn those basic swim skills. Survival swimming skills is important, but basic swim skills is absolutely needed. So one of the things you're going to see come out and stated in the 8th edition of the Canadian Drowning Prevention Plan, which will be launched on or around May 4th, we're aiming for May 4th, is that all Canadians need to have basic swim skills. Need it. Absolutely essential. And it has to be part where we're actually recommending that it be part of the public healthcare system with no barriers and universal access, and is to be used as immunization for drowning prevention in Canada. So basic swim skills, absolutely essential for all groups. So let's swing back to these swimming lessons in schools, or let's swing back to the survival swimming skills training that's taking place. There's through a program called Swim to Survive, which is a Lifesaving Society program put out and still delivered in many schools, as I mentioned, Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia in particular. Why is this still able to happen within these provinces? It's because there are 3 key components that tend to come together to make it successful. Government funding continued. We have community participation and a willingness to participate in the program. So the community is really driving this forward. And there's a champion, an ambassador, as could be a civic foundation or an NGO that's really working well. And we've seen that when we look at these 3 components, a tripod, if you will, when all 3 of those legs are in place, this happens within the school systems. So what's happened because of COVID? We've lost 2 cohorts. We've lost a tail end because when do the schools go in to do this program? After Christmas, after March break. So we've lost 2020, we've lost 2021. Now we have missed 2 full school years, 2 cohorts of kids have gone through. Why is this important? Because just like vaccination clinics for COVID, you can set up the clinics and wait for people to come, but the people who are at greatest risk are still working. They're still in workplaces. So in order to immunize them, the best place to have the clinic is in the workplace. Take it to them. The same thing holds true for kids. So we're going to have kids who are able to sign up and continue swimming lessons because it's something that they've grown up doing or something within their community or their neighborhood. But those at greatest risk won't be signing up for swimming lessons. They need to take it as part of their participation within the school system. It needs to come to them. And we've missed 2 whole years. And it's not simply those 2 years. This impacts families because this is an introduction. So those at greatest need, we have our new Canadians in particular. Many have come from countries who wouldn't even have swimming lessons on the radar. And if you're coming to a new country, are you going to put swimming lessons and something that's considered to be a leisurely activity high on your radar? No, because you're looking at, housing, you're looking at learning a new language, you're looking at food, you're looking at work, and all these other things balance, take precedence over this. But through the school systems, through a Swim to Survive program or a basic swim skills acquisition program delivered through the schools, it's certainly a way that we can do that. And so again, immunization against drowning. And I'm purposely putting these 2 together because our mindsets have shifted over the course of this last year plus, learning a great deal from this pandemic. And there should be a new normal coming from, as a result of this. Let's take what we've learned. Your big question.
Well,
Why?
I guess let me just add, because you provided a ton of great information there. So with what's coming out in the next report, what is the likelihood that is adopted by is this a federal initiative or provincial initiative?
We would like for this to roll out nationally. And so there's ways of doing that. We're investigating ways of doing that. We are having conversations. The Public Health Agency of Canada does recognize that new Canadians are a high-risk population for many different things, right? And so when you're coming to a new country, there's new food. So there's inactivity that will be on the rise because you're adjusting. There's all kinds of things to consider from a health perspective. But I have other notes here. we know that many of the risks parallel social determinants of health. So it disproportionately affects, as I said, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, New Canadians, elderly, rural populations. We take a public health approach within the Canadian Drowning Prevention Plan and in the coalition itself, which is a very unique way of looking at drowning. But it has been driven by the World Health Organization. And part of that, Jason, is that we also need to wrap our heads, and this echoes something else that Barb has said, which is really important. We need to look at drowning. We need to look at it from the perspective of applying a multi-layered drowning prevention strategy. It's not just one player, it's all the players. So if you look at it and you'll see a diagram coming out in the 8th edition, there's 4 puzzle pieces, but they're all interconnected. And there's questions, and of course it breaks it down a little bit within each of these quadrants. But the first is, what can I do, or what can you do as an individual? What can my community do? What can research do? What can government, that's big G, little g, what can government do? And it all fits together in multiple pieces. So sure, we can do the research, we can bring in the data, but we need delivery partners, and we need the communities to absorb that. And for example, we'll take survival swimming implementation, right, as part of it. The community needs to drive that. We need funding from government. We need the individuals to participate. And we're not just talking children, we're talking adults. Everyone needs to learn how to do this. We are a country with how many lakes, rivers, how many open water sources? We have access everywhere. And so we really need to make this a priority.
That's a fantastic answer. I want to go to Melissa. I want to give her a chance to add to the conversation here. And so along the same lines, Melissa, she brings a different perspective from south of the border, but I'm sure there's commonalities here. And I will also put the same question to you. How does swimming become an essential service or essential a priority in American culture?
Well, like you mentioned many times, this is a global problem. It's not just us. It's not just you. This is something that the World Health Organization has indicated that it's a 3rd leading cause of unintentional, deaths worldwide, and that varies obviously from country to country. But overall, 3rd, so it's huge. But your data, I believe, is what's going to help us. It's using that data to tell your story to those targeted demographics, to get money and get attention to the problem. And one example is New Zealand went and put together, they added up what it cost for non-fatals for the either rescue of them, the respite care or hospitalization, and then possibly search and recovery for those fatals. And they got a big price tag. And then they said, hey, you know what? If we just fence some pools, it's going to be a lot cheaper and we save a lot more lives. And so that was a really cool eye opener. So that's something we can all learn from, again, even further away from just south of the border. But then, it's really honing in on that messaging. We have problems with messaging as well. Water Safety USA started a few years ago to try and get one common message. And I think what we found out is there isn't one common message. We are driving one each year, just trying to help that education easy from a consumption perspective of families, but that's why we lean on those layers of protection. Exactly what you guys have been saying all along, and that's kind of 2-pronged approach. It's one, we never know what layer to save a life until it does, and then it's one layer transitions into the other. Can we start educating, say, kindergartners or elementary schoolers with a curriculum? Is that going to be a life-saving aspect? Or is it those swim lessons? Now we've gotten them into swim lessons. Well, first, does somebody have an alarm on their home or that barrier around their pool or body of water, which we can't with open water, as we know. So that's why we rely on the education component. And then once they breach that barrier or there isn't one in place, now we rely on those swim lessons to come into effect. And heaven forbid, if something were to go terribly wrong, now we want that lifesaver to be there, somebody to know CPR. So it's just who's our message to, who's our target demographic. Just case in point is the data we have right now. We look at 6 data sets because the vetted stuff, as Barb mentioned, is going to be 2 years at least past the incident, the day of the incident. So that's helpful, and that gets us those numbers that we need to tell whether it's the drive the funding messaging or the attention messaging. But that we're driving through the rearview mirror. So we work on our first responder data. So our lifeguards, our fire, EMS, police, to give us the incident reports to be able to say, this year alone, we have already lost this many people. So right now we're looking at about 232 lives that have been lost. And that is through March 31st. So that's not even, to date. I have to pull from so many different data sources. But, again, to the point, that's 171 of those are adults. So drowning is a really big adult problem, but it pulls more on our heartstrings when it's the youth. And we already know that, again, another data set that's really important, and to use that to drive messages, is the 1 to 4 age range. It's the number one cause, the absolute number one cause a child. So kind of to Eric's point of how do we help educate on getting kids into lessons younger, right there alone, once you're 6 or 7, thank goodness you've survived that long, but your chances of a drowning incident is going to happen between that 1 and 4. So we need to get them in sooner. We need them to learn sooner. And then, another data set that was mentioned before, but of those 232 so far that we know about, 193 of those were males. So, I mean, where's the messaging going? Where's the targeting going? So we did in the U.S. in a couple of our states get swim lessons deemed as essential, and it was because we could use this data to make that point, to say this is a big problem, and then of course again localized, be able to show that because COVID shut down swim lessons, it caused this particular age group to have a higher rate of drowning. So we could tie those together. But and then again, it's using your partners and collaborating for that targeted marketing. I mean, we know it's adults that are in unsupervised areas that are drowning more. For those bigger numbers. So we work with a local family foundation, or a lot of our family foundations, to put up life jacket loaner stations so that there's life jackets in those areas that are unsupervised, and to encourage that behavior. And then we also have like river rangers out there, where similar to the program that Barb was talking about, or I'm sorry, it might've been Lisa talking about, that we use the community. These are just community-based people. They didn't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars of getting certifications. They have your basic first aid, maybe even a wilderness first aid, but they're just standing at the launch sites for our kayakers saying, hey, I'm noticing you don't have a life jacket on. Whether or not it's law for that state in that area for us, it's going to vary state to state, unfortunately. But they're saying, you need to put a life jacket on. The river's running high today. You're not an experienced kayaker. Whatever messaging they feel like they need to use for that time, they're just volunteers. They don't have certifications up to a certain point. And then, we engage the community during this time too. Like one of our cities decided to do water safety parades. They got their aquatics people, they got their fire trucks and a police car, and they did these mini parades where they started at a school and, used their loudspeakers and, tossed out water safety information to the crowds during this time. So there's creative ways out there without having to even necessarily need funding for it. Or there's organizations, again, like my local one, our local Drowning Prevention Coalition of Arizona will give out grants. So there's a lot of grant-based organizations out there to tap into to get support for these programs that are saving lives. So yeah, I think COVID has given us the blessing of us looking at things differently and change how we do things. And I think out of this, we've learned that swim lessons and water safety education needs to be determined essential everywhere. And I think we have got now a little bit of momentum behind that, and cases we can draw on and say, hey, this has happened in California and this is how they did it. So, let's track how their numbers go from that point forward and see if just making that one designation made an impact. And I think it will.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. It was a lot of information there, and it's definitely from the entire panel, the passion and everybody's commitment to the cause becomes very, very evident. So I'm going to thank that. We got to wrap this up, and I want to go before I get into what everybody else. A final word from everybody. I want to let Eric come and share some of the works. I know Eric's a very, very big advocate. He's very active, similar in Toronto, similar to Adam in Montreal, but he's very advocate on the news, on social, about getting the message out that, like this service needs to be available for everybody. It needs to be essential, and so on and so forth. So Eric, can you speak to us a little bit about your work?
Yeah, I mean, I've been running a swim school for 28 years. I was a teacher. I ran camps for many years, but I really felt that teaching kids to swim was my mission in life, and training instructors to use special techniques and all of that stuff. And when COVID hit, it shut it all down, and it was like a roller coaster like we've all been on. It really needs to be upcharged, and it actually seems selfish to say because I run a private business. Adam runs a private business. So then I flip on my drowning prevention hat, and I sat through an inquiry and an inquest through the Camping Association of a 4-year-old who drowned in a pool that was supposed to be supervised by lifeguards. And all of it was preventable. And we hear of all these preventable drownings. To be on a panel like this, Jason, I thank you for this, because I would love to be able to create a command table across North America where we have, 12 top people to make swimming lessons an essential service. And, Melissa's point is really well taken. It's happened in California. And I would say, why wait for the data? Can't we work on this now and not worry so much about when the drownings come in? I say we do it now as a preventative move. And I would love to work with anybody willing to sit on our command table to do that.
Well, you certainly have the resources here at this panel discussion in the US and Canada to get that all initiated. So here's how we're going to end this off. And you can't repeat what the person before you said. I want one clear message about what you're going to leave your community, your families, whoever you interact with. What do you want to leave them with for as a drowning prevention measure, something they need to be aware of? And we're going to start with Adam in Quebec, because Quebec obviously had a major issue with drownings. So to Adam first, one thing.
One thing. Learn to swim as young as possible, and get your kids in the pool as young as possible. And haven't learned to swim yet, get in the pool as possible.
Okay. Tamar, you're up.
Oh, well, see, I'm currently in Muskoka because that's where my family and I are from. So I think you need to keep your eyes on the water at all times. And it doesn't matter what the water is, whether it is supervised or not supervised, you are responsible for the people you bring to that water.
Brilliant. Barb, let's go to you next.
The sharing of simple messages and tools so that communities can be their own drowning prevention champions.
Brilliant. We're going to go to our American guest.
I really like Barb's. I'm going to go back to the data. I'm going to say use the data to tell the story you need to tell to whoever that group is, because you can get really good targeted marketing or messaging from whatever data you need to tell to that specific community. So use the data. And
finally, Felisa.
Melissa took the line right out of my mouth. Not surprising, is it?
You guys have clearly worked very well together.
We would. We need to touch base after this, Melissa. I was thinking this would be great. Okay, so here's one. There are key policy and legislation opportunities for drowning prevention interventions. So evidence supports the need for improved life jacket PFD wearing with a strong focus on wear for all.
Brilliant. And with the final word, I'm going to thank our panelists here, taking the time out of their day to join us share their information, their expertise, their opinions, most importantly, their passion, because I still believe that this is something that the ability to swim, the ability to learn to swim, we have taken that for granted. And without people like you guys offering the service, pushing the importance to do things right in a certain way, the structured programs and so on and so forth, we would have a problem. And to the people watching and to the people at home, we've all been locked up for the last 12 months on and off. Summer's coming, the warm weather's coming. We're all anxious to get out, run to the summer pool, run to the pond, run to the lake. You got to do it safely. You got to do it with awareness, and you got to look out for each other. So I thank all my panelists here. Have a safe, water-safe summer, and we'll talk to you soon.
The crash at the starting line, engines pumping and thumping.
Hey, if you like that, head over to YouTube and check out the Ocean Junction channel. Make sure to like and subscribe for more great videos featuring amazing speakers. Thanks for watching.